So I'll just introduce myself. My name's Holly Castle and I'm a clinical psychologist working into the neuropsychology service.
And I'm Trishna Gandhi, a clinical psychologist working in neuropsychology.
So we're providing this webinar for you to access today in recognition of the continuing pressures and challenges we're all facing in the current pandemic and the lockdown situation, with pressures in both our personal lives and professional as well, and all these factors impacting on our general and psychological well-being. So you might be experiencing feelings about what's to come, maybe mixed feelings, perhaps feeling very exhausted from how long this has continued for, with some uncertainty about what's to come in the future, but maybe balancing that with some hope as well, especially with the more recent advice we've had about the restrictions and plans over the next few months. So we're hoping to use today to give you some space and time to think about some of the challenges that we're facing, and also to learn about how our brains work. And they work in different ways, but especially when we're faced with internal and external threats. We want to talk to you a bit more about the way our emotional systems cope with that and manage, and hopefully you could take from this some strategies and tools to treat yourself with kindness, and also think about ways to support the practice of looking after yourself. So just thinking about getting the most out of today then. Obviously this is a webinar recording, so you can just pause and come back to the exercises and just do those at your own pace when you need to. We've got our email addresses at the start of the presentation, so if you have any questions after you've been through this today, then please do feel free to get in touch and ask us. So before I go on to this next slide about understanding our body's response to stress and being in stressful situations, just give you an image to think about. So if we think about a flight attendant attending a pre-flight safety check, and you'd be advised to be given to use a mask, an oxygen mask, if anything happened on the plane. And they do this because if you lost consciousness, you wouldn't be able to help that person sat next to you. It's really important in this situation to look after your needs. And we could compare this to basically running around and taking care of everyone else's needs whilst neglecting our own, and that not being something that we can do basically without being able to prioritise our own self-care. So that's why we wanted to use today to hopefully give you, if you think of it almost like a strategy or a toolkit, that you can go away and hopefully practice some of these skills around self-care and looking after yourself in these times where we're all facing lots of uncertainty and challenges. So this next slide is just thinking about how our bodies respond to stress, because we're all basically hardwired to have the same stress response. So sometimes we experience high levels of physiological arousal, so that might be related to more of an ongoing stress on our lives. For example, if we had an injury or work-based stress, something happening to us, or it might be something that's ongoing over a long period of time, such as the pandemic that's going on for many months. So when we're in stressful situations, our bodies basically, our stress systems kick into action, they start, and that works in different ways. So you might be familiar with the term the fight or flight response. So this is what's called our sympathetic nervous system, and that's the system that's there. It's to help us survive. We wouldn't be here without it, and that's there for basically when we're in threat or danger, a life-threatening emergency. It's a survival tool that we've all basically evolved with. However, the problem is our brains don't know the difference, and it can't distinguish between what's an internal or an external stressor. And that can be a real challenge in the modern world, where there's ongoing stressors on our lives. Our bodies basically stay switched on. So all the things that happen to us when this fight or flight response kicks in, so things like adrenaline pumping around our bodies, that basically keeps happening, because that pressure, that internal or external stress is still there. Just thinking about how our bodies respond to stress, we're all hardwired to have this fight or flight response. And if we think about our ancestors, this was really important, like I was saying, for our survival. If you imagine if they were to leave a cave and go searching for food, they'd hear sounds behind them and they might run away. And 9 times out of 10, that might be something quite harmless, but it could have been something that was more dangerous, like a snake or something about to eat them. So those ancestors that did have this better safe than sorry approach are the ones that have then survived to then pass on their genes. They might have felt anxious and run away when they didn't need to, but they're the ones that would have survived. So that's why it's something which has evolved over time for us all to basically have. It's almost like our default setting. So have a think about what do you notice going on in your own body when you're feeling stressed. There's lots of different things that you might experience when this threat response kicks in, but it's good to spend some time just thinking about, for you, what is it that you tend to notice? So when the threat system's activated, it has an impact on lots of different systems in the body. So one of those is it basically can inhibit your ability to think clearly. So before I go on to thinking about the different ways our emotional systems work, there's an exercise that we could practice here, something that we can basically use to slow down our stress responses. And there's lots of evidence which suggests this can actually help us to re-engage our frontal lobes and help us to think more clearly, something that's impacted by the stress response. So when you're doing this exercise, if you just try and find somewhere where you're free from distractions, somewhere that you could be for perhaps 5 or 10 minutes, and then just get into a nice comfortable position, sitting somewhere where you feel comfortable and where you can focus on the exercise. So just as you're doing this, just start to notice your posture and just notice how you feel about where you're sat. Just feel the contact of where you're sat on the chair, or if you're lying down. Put your feet flat on the floor to help in grounding yourself, and just feel where your feet make contact with the floor. And just try and sit with a nice straight back and straight posture, feeling supported in your spine. And then just slowly start to bring attention to your breath. So this exercise includes elements of mindfulness. So just encouraging you to bring attention to your breathing, just slowly starting to notice the breath coming in through your nose and out through your mouth. And then just start to do that a little bit longer than you normally would. Just imagining it a little bit like a tide rising in and then going out again. And you can even start to, as you get into more of a rhythm with your breathing, count in for 3 seconds, pause, and just gently breathe out again for 3 seconds. And you're just slowly trying to get into a breathing pattern that's soothing and a rhythm that's right for you. And you could pause the video here if you want to keep trying this for a little bit longer. As you're doing it, you might notice your thoughts wandering, and that's perfectly normal. That's what our minds do. And if you do notice that, just really gently just bring your attention and your focus back to the breath. And for the second part of this exercise, just trying to imagine something that's peaceful to you. So it might be being with someone or something or somewhere that you care about. And in the same way you were doing before, just keep bringing that focus back to your breath, trying to get into a soothing pattern of breathing in for 3 seconds and then out. And you could even try just experimenting a little bit with the breath, just seeing if you breathe in a bit faster or out a bit more slowly, what changes you notice in your body. And then when you're ready to finish the exercise, just really gradually, if you've closed your eyes, if you've done this, just gently open them and just come back into the physical space around you. And maybe just take a moment just to pause and reflect how you found doing that exercise today. Did you notice any changes? Maybe in your posture? Did you notice what thoughts were happening? What thoughts and feelings showed up for you as you were doing that today? And were you able to keep bringing the focus and your attention back to the breath if anything did come up for you? Okay. So now I'm just going to go on to a model, which is basically a way of thinking about our emotions and why we feel and act the way that we do. And this is the three circles model. And this is a really simplified version of it, but it's actually based on lots of evidence from neuroscience, which suggests that we have these 3 main emotional systems. And we have them because we need all 3 of them, and each does have its own important evolutionary function. So we've just talked about the threat system, the fight or flight response, and that's important. That's there to keep us safe from harm, and that's represented by the red circle. And then we have the drive system, and this is the one that's there to motivate us to do the things that help us to prosper, and this is the blue circle. And then lastly, we've got the green system here, and this is the soothing system, and that's the one that's there to help to calm us down, and this is the one that allows us to bond with others and make connections. And it's neither of these circles are bad. These systems work best when they're in balance. The problem can be when one of these 3 systems becomes overactivated and starts to take over the others. And we'll go on to explaining each of these systems in more detail. So the first system, this is our alarm system, and its main purpose is to basically pick up on threats quickly. And it's the system, you mentioned adrenaline earlier, so it's the system which is the one that drives and gives us these bursts of hormones, such as the stress hormone, cortisol, and neurotransmitters such as adrenaline. And these are the things that gives us the feelings of anxiety or anger or even disgust. And they're basically directing our attention and then our behaviour, our actions towards protecting ourselves from the threat, whether that's an internal threat or something external. And this is where the fight or flight or even freeze response gets activated. And this is the system which basically prepares our body to either fight or to run away. And where this is not possible, it's the one that inhibits us or stops us from doing things which might be dangerous. So that's where we might be in a freeze situation. And it's very sensitive, so it's our default setting. It's sensitive to the danger of social rejection because of the survival advantage that we had as being part of a larger group. And because our brains are hardwired in this way, it gives more priority to dealing with threat and stress than it does to pleasurable things. So it's the one which is more easily to activate. So it's the easiest one to trigger, And it's, for many people, these feelings are the ones which you're most likely to feel. And when it's been overactivated, it can lead to lots of anxiety. We mentioned how it impacts sometimes on ability to think clearly. And it's the one which basically operates on a better safe than sorry principle. So it's useful to keep in mind, because it can be very over-eager and it's very likely to overreact easily. It's not a sign that there's something wrong. It's basically our bodies doing what they're designed to do. But unfortunately, that does mean it does take a lot of work to calm this system down. So if you just imagine this is a system which gets overexcited, so you can imagine what happens to us in the context that we're all facing now of a global pandemic. It's not surprising really that this system for a lot of people is in overdrive. So spend a moment just thinking about potentially, just move on to the next slide, all the pressures and threats, extra sources of threat that you've had to deal with over the past almost year now. What things might have been activating your threat system, either at work or outside of work. And there's some examples that we've listed here, but there might also be some areas that we haven't covered. And it might be also useful to think about these systems can operate as in an individual person, but also whole teams that can become in threat mode when lots of people are in threat mode at the same time, and the impact that might have.
So the function of the drive system is to try and motivate, and it encourages us to seek out things that we kind of that are important to us, and to kind of achieve goals that we need to survive and to thrive. So some of those basic things are, you know, the motivation towards things like to eat, to kind of seek out food, our sex drive, resources. So I think it's a really important system that that we need to put into action, and gives us that drive. It kind of functions through a boost of a chemical that you might have heard of called dopamine. So kind of these hits almost, when we achieve something, we get this hit of dopamine, which helps us feel good, and when we feel good, we want to repeat that behavior. So it's kind of that is a really big part of the drive system, and helps us kind of want to continue to work towards the goals we have. And things that can activate the drive system and trigger this dopamine release are things like if you pass something, like for example your driving test or an exam, falling in love, meeting someone that you enjoy spending time with, winning a game or a competition. So that kind of that feeling that you get when you've been rewarded with something. And when it's balanced, it guides us towards important life goals. So you know, it helps us kind of work towards what we want to aspire to and what we want to achieve. But sometimes it can be overactivated, but sometimes it can also be underactivated. And that's when we often feel little energy, we have little drive and desire and motivation to do things. And at times when that drive system isn't in action, we can sometimes feel a bit depressed as well. If we're overactivated, we can go into a bit of an overdrive, and you know, especially at this moment in time, you know, there might be people who are underactivated and perhaps feeling a bit more kind of low and down and perhaps depressed. But on the other hand, there are probably a lot of people as well who are overactivated and kind of burning out because they're doing so much more, kind of they've just gone into kind of a overdrive kind of mode. So what we want to try and do is, as with the three systems, is try to balance them. So it's important to find our balance with the drive system. An example of kind of the drive system having an impact on our lives. So for example, you know, if you win the lottery, and you suddenly become a millionaire overnight, you might feel so energized that you won't be able to sleep. Your mind might be racing with all the different things you're going to buy. You might want to go partying all the time. You know, so you can see the impact it can have when the drive system kind of is in action and it's overstimulated at times. I guess it's kind of, if that continues, that's when that can become quite problematic, perhaps. I guess another kind of time is when, you know, for example, if someone takes when people take drugs, that again kind of biologically stimulates kind of sometimes some of those reward systems and the dopamine, and therefore kind of it encourages people to want to take more drugs. Otherwise, they might kind of they have the come down, which, you know, is really difficult. So relating to what Holly was just saying, the threat and the drive system are really closely related. And so for example, if you are in your drive system and you are kind of trying to achieve something, for example, I don't know, you are trying to I don't know, organize something for your set, put a presentation together. However, you don't have the resources that are available for that presentation. You don't have the information, you don't have the data, perhaps you're waiting on different people. That may take you into the threat system. So they are quite closely linked. So we might perceive a threat in what we're trying to achieve with our goals. In turn, if our threat system is activated, and for example, if you're feeling stressed or anxious, your threat system might be kind of activated by making you kind of, you know, to try and manage, you know, feeling burnt out or feeling exhausted. You might then try to work harder. You might try to do extra things. So they both are quite interlinked. So something that puts you kind of in threat might activate your drive system, but something that kind of activates your drive system might also put you into threat. And I guess examples at the moment during COVID are kind of which you may be able to relate to, you know, for example, the working harder, maybe having shorter breaks, wanting, if you're kind of new to like a ward, or if you've been redeployed, or if you're new to the trust, wanting to do well in your workplace. You might find yourself going home but still thinking about work, maybe having your replying to emails when you've finished work. So sometimes, you know, at the moment, it's quite possible that your drive system might be into that overactive drive system. So maybe just spend a bit of time thinking about what things might relate, you know, in terms of your own situation, what might kind of, you know, relate to you in terms of your drive system.
So I'm just going to go on to talking today about the soothing system, which is the final of the 3 systems we've mentioned. So the function of this one is to support us in calming the threat and drive, as Trish mentioned, and promoting the contentment and connections that we have to other people. So I mentioned the sympathetic nervous system and how that's there to heighten our basically our body's stress response and put us into this fight or flight mode. But when the parasympathetic nervous system is activated, that's the one that we were tapping into with the soothing rhythm breathing exercise we just practiced. It's activating our heart to slow, our breathing calms, and because we don't need to fight or hide, then our body starts to send blood to organs and away from the muscles, and we digest our food, we make hormones such as oxytocin and endorphins, which are mentioned here. And that's the one, it's the system where we repair basically, so our body's in a state of relaxation, and that's the one where we can recover and start to balance these 3 systems. So when it's activated, we might get a boost of, like I mentioned, endorphins, and it gives us this feeling of peacefulness and well-being. And the hormone oxytocin, that's the one that's linked to social safety and connection and promoting bonds with other people. So from an evolutionary point of view, it's been very important for us as humans who are born helpless. We need to bond with our parents in order to survive. So it's a really important system because it's there for our protection. Being able to calm down the threat and the drive systems is something that also helps us to inhibit aggression and competitiveness. And that's what helps us to build up and maintain these social connections and groups and cooperate with other people. So we obviously get very pleasant feelings of contentment and safety, and these are quite different to the positive feelings we might get from the drive system as well, as being energized in a different sort of way and hyped up that you might get if that system's more activated. Unfortunately, this system is the one that's not always that well developed or easily activated, and it can often be the one that gets neglected or forgotten. So I want to just spend some time today just thinking about the different ways that you might be able to activate and tap into using this system. Okay, so we've got some examples there about some of the things which might be barriers to us activating this system, especially in the current climate. We're having to isolate and do social distancing and perhaps feeling very disconnected from friends and family that you care about. There's also the fact that others have become a source of threat in itself due to the pandemic, and obviously having that lack of physical touch, which is the one that often for many people promotes the release of these hormones that help us to connect. So this next exercise is just to spend a moment just thinking about where you are at the moment in terms of your own 3 circles. So you could even draw them out on a piece of paper and just draw how big or small, or use to think about how balanced they are today. Is the one which is a lot larger than the other ones? Which one is it? And which one do you feel is contributing to that? And then we'll just start having to think about what might help you to get more balance. If the soothing system you notice is the one which is a lot smaller than the other 2. So think about ways of activating that soothing system and calming down the threat or drive. We're not necessarily trying to make that go away, but learning to manage that better. And that might be through using some of these techniques, like the soothing within breathing practice we just tried. There's some examples listed here. It's not something that's just lovely to do. It's not just about getting in relaxation, but it's a necessity. Something we need to do to look after ourselves and promote our psychological well-being. So there might be some things that you've tried that are listed here, but there might be other things that you find helpful as well. And we've put some suggestions here as well for a self-care first aid kit. So that might be something that you could easily draw upon when you notice either your threat system or your drive systems being overactivated in comparison to your soothing system. So you might have some things in there which you have found helpful in the past. So either something that smells nice to help you ground yourself, or some calming sounds, some music that you enjoy, or some visual items like some photos of people that you care about. We've also just included some links here that you might consider even now in the future if you wanted to get some extra support. And thank you for listening to the webinar today. And if you do have any questions or anything that you want to ask more about the webinar today, then just email myself or Trishna. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.